Our objectives in this video are really simple. It's to understand what is an IPv6 address and how it's represented on the network. Now, before we begin, Vince Lombardi, the coach of the Green Bay Packers, he's now passed away, but he used to, every season before football would start, he would get his team together in the spring practices and say, "Gentlemen, this is a football." Now, these guys knew what a football was. It wasn't like, "Oh, gee, that's a football." But he focused on the basics. And before we get too wrapped up into, what exactly is an IPv6 address and how's it broken up, we want to make sure we understand why we even need an IP or IPv6 address in the first place. So let's use an analogy that we're all familiar with. Let's use a house. Imagine the house or the building that you're in right now. That house has a couple of components to its address. It's got an address so it can get mail and so forth. And a couple of pieces are the street that it's on. And one thing you'll notice about the street that your building's on or your house is on is that the street name is common to all the other houses on that street. So I live on a street called Kings Wharf Lane in Las Vegas, Nevada. And everybody on my street has that part of their address in common. They all are on Kings Wharf Lane. If they're on some other street, they wouldn't be my neighbors on that same street. So that's the first component of a house address, is that there's a street name involved. Another component is that there's an individual house number for each house. So my house number is different than my neighbor's is different than his neighbor's down the road, and so forth. And so the two components I want to focus on for addressing in a residential area would be a street name, which is common to all the people on that street, and a house number, which is unique to each house. Now, why do we bring that up? Well, check this out. We can use that same exact analogy as we compare addressing for houses to networks. There are two major components of an IP or IPv6 address. We have a network portion, and that network portion is like a common street name. So everybody on your network is going to have those same common bits, if you will, as part of their address. If they live on network 10, they're going to be on network 10 with you. And that's going to be common. We also are going to have a unique host identifier, which is like a house number that each computer is going to get. So each computer is going to have an IP address. Part of that IP address is going to represent the common street that device is living on, and the other part of that IP address is going to represent the actual host ID, the unique house number, if you will, for each individual host. So now we understand why are the basic components of IP addressing. Let me introduce you to IPv6. Now check this out. This is fun. An IPv6 address is really simple. It's a bunch of ones and zeros. In fact, it's a lot of them. It's 128 bits. Now, it's not very realistic for us to type all those into a computer or to a device because we'd have typos and mistakes, but that's really behind the scenes what it is. It's 128 bits long, and part of that 128 bits on the left-hand side, some portion of that is representing the network, which is like a street name. And every device on that common network segment is going to have those common bits. On the right-hand side, we have our host IDs, which is like a house number that individually identifies a single device on that common street. And the magic really isn't magic. The way we know which portion of this long 128-bit stream, how much of that is the network and how much is the host ID, is a dividing line called the mask. The mask is really simple. If we have a mask of 64, all that means is that the first 64 bits represent the network address. That's it. And that would mean that there's 64 bits left over for the host ID. And most of the time, for most customers, we're going to be splitting the network and the host ID 50-50 right down the middle. So that's how we know that the left half is the network, because of /64, and the right half is left over for host ID. Now, working with the 128-bit number really is kind of daunting, so we're going to break it down, and we have broken it down into smaller chunks. Like somebody once said, well, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is, one bite at a time, one piece at a time. You break a big thing into smaller chunks, and that's all we're doing here. Check this out. we take a 128-bit number, this IP address, which we know includes the network on the left and the host ID on the right, and we're going to break it into 16-bit groups. Now, it's going to break it into 8 groups of 16 bits each. And to just have visual clarity, we're going to add a colon between every 16 bits. So really, it's just 8 chunks, 8 groups of bits, and there's 16 in each group. Okay, so how is that going to help us? Well, at least it's smaller quantities. We still have the issue, however, of implementing this in a network. I mean, typing in all the ones and zeros doesn't make sense. Well, with IP version 4, what we did is we represented 8 bits at a time into decimal. And that was great. Because we have so many numbers to deal with, instead of converting the binary into decimal, we're going to convert the binary into hexadecimal. Oh, it's so easy. It's easier than doing decimal conversion into binary. Let me walk you through this. Let's take a number. Let's take the first 32 bits of this IPv6 address we have up here, and let's just take 4 bits at a time, because that's really all we have to deal with. 4 bits. Anybody can deal with 4 bits. Now, if we look at the powers of 2, we have 4 bits. We have a 8-bit position, the 4-bit position, the 2-bit position, and the 1-bit position. And those values that we have are in gray above the actual IPv6 address. And so let's just take 4 at a time. Now, sometimes people will call 4 bits, they'll call them a nibble. That's not a joke. That's a literal term. It used to be like Nybble. I think you could spell it Nibble. But if a byte is 8 bits, a nibble is half that. It's 4 bits. So let's take the first 4 bits and convert that. Now, if we have 0010, there's a 1 on in the 2 position. I put the values in gray above it, and that would be a value of 2. Now, the good news is that 0 through 9 is the same for decimal and hexadecimal. So we have 2 plus 0 is 2, so we have 2. If we move on to the next 4 bits, we have 4 zeros. Well, 4 zeros, no 8s, no 4s, no 2s, no 1s, that's also a 0. Let's go to the next grouping of 4 zeros. We have no 8s, no 4s, no 2s, no 1s, that's also a 0. Okay, great. So our conversion of the first 12 bits are 200. You with me? Okay, so check this out. The last grouping before the colon is 0001. We have a 1 on in the 1 position, and that equals a hexadecimal or decimal value of 1. That's it. Now, the colon is just a visual representation that, hey, that's the end of that 16-bit grouping. Let's go to the next grouping. So if we go to the right of the first colon there, we have 4 more zeros. That's a 0. No 8s, no 4s, no 2s, no 1s. And then, my friends, it gets a little bit interesting. Let's just convert 1101 and find out what that is in decimal. Well, there's an 8, and there's a 4, so that's 12. And there's 1 more, because the 1 on the 1 position, that's 13. So in decimal, that would be 13. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our handy-dandy conversion chart to see what that would be in hex. See up in the top left-hand corner, let's take a look at this together. Decimal and hexadecimal are the same, 0 through 9. It's when we start carrying the 1 in decimal that hex doesn't carry the 1 yet. That's because decimal is base 10 and hexadecimal is base 16. So if we take a look at the number 9, in decimal or in hex, it's a 9. But once we reach 10 in decimal, in hexadecimal, a 10 is an A. 11 is a B, a 12 is a C, a 13 is a D, a 14 is an E, and a 15 is an F. And you want to remember those. In fact, you don't really have to remember. You can just write them down. Like, okay, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's going to go 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, and stop. And they're done. A child who's watched Sesame Street could actually pull this off by just matching it up, saying, okay, 10 is A, and then all the way through F. And that's it. I also put the binary in there for your reference. So if we wanted to convert the next 4 over of the D value that we have there of 1101, we know that is a 13 in decimal, and that would be a D in hexadecimal. The next value is 1011. So that's an 8 plus 2 plus 1. That'd be 11. 8 plus 2 is 10, plus 1 more is 11. And if we look at our chart, 11 is a B. So converting 4 bits at a time into hexadecimal is super. Just convert it into decimal. If it's higher than 9, convert that number to its hexadecimal equivalent, and you're good to go. And then the last conversion up here is 1000, which is an 8, no 4s, no 2s, no 1s, which is a value of 8. And that's the first 32 bits of our 128-bit IPv6 address. And that is an important skill to have to be comfortable, first of all, that an IPv6 address is 128 bits long. It's got 2 parts to it. There's a network address portion on the left, usually at a 64-bit margin, and then we have a host ID, which is also normally at a 64-bit position on the right side, and the mask will tell you exactly where that dividing line is. The default mask that we're going to see most of the time in IPv6 is a /64. This 128-bit address is chopped up into 8 groups of 16 bits each. Within those groups of 16 bits, we can convert them 4 bits at a time into hexadecimal by taking a look at those 4 bits and finding out what the value is in the 8s and the 4s and the 2 and the 1 position. So how exactly do we apply an IPv6 address? It couldn't be easier. Once we've identified what we want to use as the 128-bit IP address, we just go ahead and plug it in. So if we want to put an interface, let's say FA0/1 onto this network with these common bits, and then give it a unique host ID, we could do so really simply by going into configuration mode. And once in configuration mode, we'll go to interface FA0/1 right here. And we'll just say, I want you to use IPv6 address, and then you give it the address. Now in this case, the first 64 bits have to match this. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 2001, the 0db8. And what I'm going to do in this one example only is I'm going to put the leading zeros there as well, because there's 4 characters, 4 more characters, 4 more characters. The leading zeros, you don't have to type in, but I'm going to do it just for demonstration. So once I've done this, that's it. Now, the leading zeros, as I mentioned, we don't have to put back in, because the router, if you have a leading zero, like 00 here or 0 there, or the 000, it's going to simply say, leading zeros don't mean anything inside that grouping. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it off. It's like on a calculator. If you add 001 plus 002, what do you get? 003. It's really just 3. The leading zeros have no value. So we do a show IPv6 interface brief. It's showing us this 128-bit IPv6 address. It's what we typed in, 2001, 0db8. It left off the leading 0 in that group. 0021, it left off the leading zeros there. With 0111, left off the 0 there. And then the rest of this, so this part right here is our network address. If we take a look at our topology, 2001 db8:21:111, that is our 64-bit network address. That's the street name that all these computers are going to have in common. The last 64 bits here is the unique host ID for this router's interface. And how do we know it's 64 bits? Because the mask said that the first 64 bits right here are all network, and that left the remainder of 64 bits to represent the actual host ID. Now, there's a lot of fascinating stuff that's still going on behind the scenes when we just put that IPv6 address on, including this link local address. I've got that in another video as well. Before I send you off, I have a homework assignment that I'd like you to do, and here it is. Should you choose to accept it, I'd like you to take this host ID. Now, this is the back half, the last 64 bits of maybe host A or host B, and I'd like you to convert it from binary, 1 nibble at a time, convert it into a hexadecimal host ID. So pretend there's 64 bits in front of it. I just want you to do the last 64 bits. And when you're done, do me a favor and just make a quick post on the video with the answer. Once I've got a handful of those and I know that you've actually done some of the homework, I'm going to go ahead and place the next video in, which is going to take a look at the link local address and some of the magic that's happening behind the scenes when we put an IPv6 address on a computer or a router interface. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you next.